In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, standing by Sandberg, why Facebook CEO says he wants to work with Sheryl Sandberg for decades to come, and says he has no plans to step down himself as chair. Plus, Foxconn is planning to cut almost $3 billion from expenses next year. Could it be a sign of trouble for the global electronics industry that goes much deeper than Apple? And Alphabet Chair John Hennessy is struggling with Google's China strategy, why he says he's unsure whether Google can do more good than harm with a censored search engine. But first, to our top story, continued volatility in the tech market. Wednesday morning saw some relief for tech equities as stocks climbed after steep losses Tuesday. Both the Nasdaq and the S&P 500 saw gains to start the day. Even Apple, which had lost 7.5%, Monday and Tuesday began with some modest gains after reports of iPhone production being cut. To discuss, let's go to New York, where Bloomberg Tech's Julie Verhage is standing by. Julie, every day is different. How do we even know how to assess this market?
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens in a light trading week, right? A lot of people have already taken off for the Thanksgiving holidays, so the swings that we've seen can be quite exaggerated compared to when everybody's in the office working. And, you know, something that you pointed out is that these big tech companies really saw an awful first 2 days of this week, and that in turn made it so the entire markets ended up falling quite a bit because they make up such an outside portion of the Dow, the S&P, etc. A 1% move in something like Apple or Amazon isn't the same as a 1% move in Gap or Foot Locker, for instance. So that big move made it to just everything started tanking. You saw some days where, you know, the Dow was down more than 600 points at one point, and the Nasdaq really leading the way on a lot of that. But today is an entirely different story. We've seen a lot of gains. Apple making up a lot of the losses that it had yesterday. Facebook's even up close to 3% today. So it'll be really interesting to see what things look like next week when, you know, everybody's back at their desks deciding what's next.
So let's take a look at the bigger picture then. Hundreds of billions of dollars have been wiped off the market caps of big tech since August. So is that the trend that is going to continue in the big picture?
Well, if you take a look at what the S&P, the Nasdaq, and the Dow Jones have done for the past couple of years, what you'll see is that all of a sudden the Nasdaq started leading the way in terms of those gains. And right now, it's kind of come back and traded more in line with what the other indices are doing. So I think, you know, it was kind of like it got ahead of itself a little bit. There was a lot of sort of extra optimism out there. We had good earnings reports from a lot of these companies, and everyone just figured the rally was going to keep going. So I think people just got a little bit ahead of themselves. And, you know, into the year end and 2019, it'll be interesting to see what traders expect next and where things go from there.
So that is the interesting question. What happens after the Thanksgiving holiday? Is there a Santa Claus rally? What are investors telling you?
So right now is the time of year where a lot of these big banks will start sending in notes saying, you know, this is what our prediction is for 2019, etc. And a lot of them do expect the rally to continue, but not very big gains. You're talking like 4 to 5% for the S&P 500 next year, which isn't necessarily outpacing inflation that much. So people shouldn't expect to come back and all of a sudden see this blockbuster year, but they also shouldn't expect to come back and see the Dow, the S&P decline 10, 15, 20%. But again, that's just what their predictions are. Different news flow. We've got trade that we're worried about with China, other news flow in terms of company specific with people worried about what the future holds for Apple and the iPhone. That will have a lot of impact on what analysts, traders, and everyone else in the market expects moving forward.
And, of course, worries about Facebook as well. Julie Verhage for us in New York. Thanks so much for bringing us up to date. Well, Mark Zuckerberg is once again speaking out in defense of his COO. Zuckerberg voiced his support for the embattled Sheryl Sandberg for her handling of Facebook's response to Russian election meddling. Here's what he had to say on CNN Tuesday.
Sheryl is a really important part of this company and is leading a lot of the efforts to address a lot of the biggest efforts that the biggest issues that we have. And she's been an important partner for me for 10 years. And, you know, I'm really proud of the work that we've done together. And I hope that we work together for decades more to come.
To talk more about the continued fallout at Facebook, we've got Bloomberg Tech Sarah Fryer in LA here with me in the studio. Bloomberg Intelligence's senior analyst Jitendra Wawal. Sarah, I want to start with you. This interview on CNN, Zuckerberg, really didn't go much further than what he has already said. But what was your big takeaway?
Well, I think the big takeaway here is that Sheryl, for the first time, is being hit directly by this New York Times article. In the past few months, Emily, you and I have discussed, where has she been in the public conversation? Is she doing more behind the scenes work? Where does Sheryl fit into all of this? Because we've heard a lot of calls for Mark Zuckerberg to step down or be held accountable, but it hasn't really touched Sheryl. And I think that New York Times report last week really focused on specific decisions that she made that affected the outcome for the company here. And so I think we're seeing a lot more direct focus on her, and Zuckerberg certainly needed to come out and say directly that he still supports her, would work with her for decades to come. Who expects decades to come? But certainly he does.
Now, as you said, a lot of the reporting has focused on Sheryl Sandberg's decision in particular. Now, we had an argument made on the show earlier this week by an investor who had a sort of counterintuitive take, saying she believes that Sheryl Sandberg is being thrown under the bus, and that what really needs to be looked at is the decisions of the board as a whole over the last several years that have gotten us to this point. Take a listen to what this investor, Julie Goodrich, had to say.
I only feel like she's being thrown under the bus because I think that this stuff has been going on a lot longer and has been a bigger problem that is related to technology at the company and the way algorithms are used and the way they are used for other purposes. And that's why Mark Zuckerberg, obviously doesn't get sort of the impact that his company has on society.
Sarah, there is, of course, a lot of blame to go around, but what about this board, which is filled with very, very experienced tech investors and CEOs?
Look, the board is pretty defanged because Zuckerberg holds all the voting control in this company, not all of it, but the majority, and he is basically unfireable, and he's also the chairman of the board. But when you look at how Facebook is organized and how it's run over the last few years, Zuckerberg is really in charge of some of those problems with algorithms and product and engineering and the overall vision. And Sandberg has been more directly involved in policy, legal, operations, scaling the business to the size that it is, and also handling those relationships with governments around the world, making sure that Facebook's message is consistent and proactive. And I think those are some of the issues that we're seeing come up with how Facebook has denied things as they came up. They've tried to deflect blame. They've tried to obfuscate what was going on. And those problems certainly sit with Sheryl. So I think that there is a lot of blame to go around here, but I think there's a reason that the focus has turned and why Zuckerberg had to answer directly about her leadership on that interview yesterday.
And Jitendra, obviously, what Sheryl is responsible for is building the business. And
absolutely.
Will this be the straw that breaks the camel's back? Will this be what finally gets users to turn away from Facebook? Because we really haven't seen some dramatic decline in user engagement or dramatic decline in ad sales.
You're right. And the issue over here is if you look at Facebook's valuation multiples right now, that's lowest it's ever been. Compare that with the expectations, 0% earnings growth expected next year. So that basically tells you that investors don't really have a lot of faith in the long-term story at the moment. There's a lot of visibility issue with Facebook. And one of the things that they can do, changes are required, but one of the things that they can do if board cannot be reshuffled is they could look at Google and how they came up with the alphabet structure to sort of make sure they get the flexibility in terms of diversifying their revenues, get better some of the parts valuation, because right now some of the parts is greater than the total, and it should be the opposite way.
Sarah, what do you make of that argument? Robert Reich published an op-ed in The Guardian making this argument, echoing sort of what Jitendra had said. It's time to break up the tech behemoths. Certainly Facebook has a lot of valuable parts. Would they be better separate than they are together?
Actually, I think the opposite is happening. It used to be that Facebook had operated a lot of its apps separately. Instagram was separate from WhatsApp, which was separate from Messenger and Oculus and Facebook. now they're actually bringing them together. They're creating what's called a family of apps, and that's being run more directly by Chris Cox, who's the chief product officer at Facebook. And they're doing a lot more sharing of resources among those different apps and trying to make sure that the strategy and also the data collection is consistent across them. And I think that maybe would make it harder to break them up or harder to split it up. The move this year is to do the opposite.
Jitendra, will users, is this for users, going to change behavior? I mean, we all hear anecdotally about people being angry at Facebook, not wanting to use Facebook, using Instagram instead, which is still part of Facebook. But, I just wonder at this scale, does the pattern actually change, or does this blow over?
So the user growth story is not really going to change. I mean, we are seeing continued movement towards Instagram, WhatsApp engagement, and things like that remain strong. So those numbers, it's difficult to see that trajectory changing. Yes, the core Facebook user growth numbers would, continue to come down. But overall, if you look at advertisers, what they're doing and what users are doing, that story is not changing. But that protects the near term. You have to think about more longer term, where the growth story here hinges on, taking advantage of WhatsApp and Messenger monetization, which is not that easy. They would need partnerships, they would need acquisitions in the future to sort of like even diversify beyond advertising. And I feel like the current setup makes or holds back growth from the other properties that they can take advantage of, because they are very valuable properties.
Now, Sarah, quickly before you go, I have to ask you about this memo that was obtained by TechCrunch, in which Elliot Schrage, a former head of communications for Facebook, who is on his way out, took responsibility for hiring this controversial PR firm, the Definers. What did you make of that?
Well, I think he's in a very good position to take blame for that, because he's already said he's going to leave the company. So it really doesn't hurt for him to say that, this is my fault, I coordinated this. And one thing I should point out in that memo that leaked that I found interesting is, Sandberg had said that she didn't know about, or Zuckerberg has told us that Sandberg did not know about the Definers relationship, this firm that's been doing what we know is opposition research. In this memo, she did say to employees that it may have been mentioned in a few emails to me. So that provides cover for her. So in the future, if we say, you said you didn't know about them and you did, well, there's some admission that she did.
Right, and Schrage being replaced by former UK Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, also a controversial hire who now has a lot of work to do. Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer and Jitendra Wawal, thank you both for joining us today. Coming up, it's been almost a year since Bitcoin's sky-high $20,000 valuation. Now it's piercing the $4,000 mark. What is behind the plunge? We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. That cousin who peddled Bitcoin to you last Thanksgiving will have some explaining to do Thursday. This time last year, recent adopters were bragging about their good fortunes at the dinner table as the cryptocurrency was in the middle of a bull run that would see it more than double to a record $19,511 just before the Christmas season. This year, the story is quite different. Bitcoin has pushed to as low as $4,051, and it doesn't seem like there will be a turnaround anytime soon. Here to discuss, BitPay Chief Commercial Officer Sunny Singh. So, Sunny, not to say you would have been that uncle, but what would you be saying to the Thanksgiving dinner table this year?
Yeah, I would say, hey, Bitcoin has become mainstream adoption around the world. It's got great brand recognition. And again, we shouldn't look at the price so much because it's what's really happening behind the scenes. And I don't think you're going to see any price movement up or down, really, as I said, for a long time until there's really some new direction. And that would mean things like Fidelity launching their product next year, or Bakkt launching their product, or Square launching a product, or BlackRock launching an ETF. Until those products come out, I don't think there's really any much market catalyst moving either way.
Now, what Jamie Dimon has said about Bitcoin has gotten a lot of play, but I think right now it bears worth re-listening. Take a listen to what Jamie Dimon had to say about Bitcoin last year.
It will blow up. China just kicked them out. If someone's going to lose money somewhere else, it will be, but don't ask me to short it. I'm not going to do it. It could be at 20,000 before this happens, but it will eventually blow up. It's a fraud.
Now, he later said he regretted saying that, but I wonder right now if it looks like he's being vindicated.
So I completely disagree with him on the fraud comment. Again, price can go up and down, and obviously anything that goes up that fast will obviously come down, so he's right about that. But the fraud thing, I completely disagree, and I would imagine next year when Jamie Dimon sees Fidelity's of the world launching products, that his bank will also be launching a product too as well. When you see companies maybe in the Bitcoin space doing IPOs, Silvergate today announced an IPO, which is a bank that works a lot of crypto, a lot of Bitcoin miners, maybe companies like Coinbase do an IPO next year. JP Morgan will probably get Coinbase's business, probably do lead the underwrite. So I think he'll be changing that tune pretty soon next year. But again, it might be Q1, Q2, because these big companies take a long time to launch their products.
Do you think that we should be starting to look at cryptocurrencies as different currencies? Do you think some of the other currencies will actually break away from Bitcoin, or are they all basically the same?
No, I think there's a big night and day difference between Bitcoin and everything else. Bitcoin is the 800-pound gorilla. That's the one that has the mass network effect. That's the one that the traditional financial incumbents are building products around. The other ones, I don't know what's going to happen to them. You see the ICOs being ruled by the SEC right now, having some rulings about that. I think it's safe to say the ICO market's pretty much dead right now, and maybe a couple will survive. I'm not sure, but none of them are going to survive unless Bitcoin survives first. So that's the one everyone's focused on.
Okay, so that's what you're saying this year. What does Uncle Sonny say next Thanksgiving?
I would think next year we'll see actually maybe an ETF launched by a regular BlackRock type company, a Fidelity product, possibly a Square. You're going to see traditional incumbents fighting the BitPays, the Coinbases of the world. So it should be an exciting time, actually. And again, that's just in America, but around the world, you're seeing adoption and use cases by Bitcoin. So BitPay will process, again, over $1 billion this year. Even though the price of Bitcoin dropped 75%, we were still flat on processing as we processed over $1 billion last year, because people are actually using Bitcoin, whether it be a store of value, a way of payment transact. There's just different use cases for it all over the world.
Where's the price next year?
I would say if these traditional incumbents do launch their products, actually, you would see price maybe around $15,000, possibly even $20,000 by the end of next year. But again, that depends on when these traditional incumbents launch their products, and they move very slow because nothing moves fast in fintech.
All right, Sonny, we're going to see you in another year, and probably a few times in between, but I'm going to hold you to that prediction.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonny Singh of BitPay. Coming up, ever wonder where your smartwatch or smartphone comes from? Well, there is a mega city in China turning them out. We'll take a visit next. And Bloomberg Tech live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology. Follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter too. This is Bloomberg. It's been dubbed China's Silicon Valley of hardware. If you own a smartphone or a computer, odds are parts of it came from there. In 30 years, the city has grown from a town into a mega city of over 12 million people. So welcome to Shenzhen, the manifestation of China's economic miracle. Bloomberg's Angus Bennett reports.
This is the Chinese megacity of Shenzhen, a gleaming monument to China's economic miracle. In 1980, it was a town with around 60,000 residents. Now it's China's technological hub with a population of over 12 million. Entrepreneurs, high-flying tech graduates, and international companies flock here to join the tech revolution. Welcome to Shenzhen. Shenzhen sits north of Hong Kong in the Pearl River Delta, one of the most densely urbanized regions in the world. The area has an estimated population of 120 million people. In 1980, Shenzhen was dedicated a free economic zone, an experiment in market capitalism in communist China. The effects were explosive. Shenzhen's population skyrocketed in just over 30 years. The city has a massive migrant workforce. Over 4 million residents stay during the week and then return home on the weekend. But it's tech hardware that's put this city on the map. If Silicon Valley dreams it up, then this is where it's made. This is Huacheng Bay Market, arguably the world's largest electronics market. Filming here is banned, but here's a sneaky peek. The market's neon-lit corridors stretch across multiple buildings and many floors. The stalls sell everything from the latest gadgets to the tiniest screws, and many items are rip-offs, Chinese fakes of US products. But if you wanted to, you could buy all you need to build your own smartphone, or 100,000 of them. Because Shenzhen draws in workers from across China, its food scene is just as varied as its population. If you're looking for the full banquet experience, Shang Palace and the Shangri-La Hotel has got you covered. Their dim sum lunch is a feast for the eyes and the mouth. It's a showcase of authentic Cantonese cuisine. Or try something a little more casual, such as Chinese hot pot. A simmering pot of soup stock is kept on your table, and you put your choice of ingredients in. One of the most famous variations is flavored with Sichuan pepper, so watch out, it packs a serious spicy punch. When you get the bill, you'll notice QR codes. Here in Shenzhen, they're used by locals to pay for just about everything. Simply scan the code and the money's transferred. Sounds great, but there's a hitch. You can't use them unless you have a Chinese bank account. So a technology to make life easier only works if you're a local.
It looks like we've got the first match.
Finally, why not enjoy some sport?
Look at that.
Shenzhen style.
Attacking the blue engineer.
This is RoboMaster, a competition put on by local drone and tech company DJI. Student teams from around the world compete, using a variety of self-made robots to shoot each other and destroy the opposition base.
Laser ammunition as well. That's right.
The competition aims to foster engineering and programming and keep Shenzhen at the forefront of the tech revolution.
That was Bloomberg's Angus Bennett on China's tech megacity of Shenzhen. Coming up, the holiday shopping season is drawing to a start. But as more shoppers move away from the crazy Black Friday lines and go online, will retailers like Walmart and Target be able to hold their own against Amazon? This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. The holiday shopping season is upon us, and this year an estimated 164 million people are expected to shop from Thanksgiving through Cyber Monday, with more and more taking their holiday shopping online. With e-commerce giants like Amazon in the mix, though, the stakes are higher than ever for competing retailers like Walmart and Target. And according to Boomerang Commerce, an AI tech company helping brands on Amazon, those brands may face greater competition from Amazon's own private label. Here to discuss, Boomerang Commerce CEO Guru Hariharan. So talk to us about this private label issue and how much of a threat it will be to these third-party retailers that are also Amazon's bread and butter.
Absolutely. I think it's a very interesting battle that's shifting, it started on retail, where 2018 was where Amazon was starting to show the muscle on retail, but now 2019, the entire battlefront is going to shift to consumer brands, where did you know that if you search on Amazon for Amazon's own brands, you have more than 10,000 unique products which are Amazon branded products which are available on Amazon. That means that Amazon is essentially going after the traditional brands, consumer brands, the public companies that we know of, companies like Black & Decker and Monster Cables. They're going after all of them in a very big way with to compete on market share.
It's not just batteries and baby wipes anymore, as you mentioned, it's microwaves. I mean, what products do you think will see the most competition from Amazon's own products?
So let's understand Amazon's playbook. Amazon is not a traditional merchant, meaning they don't ride on human power. They're not making decisions on by just understanding the mechanics in the industry and all of that. They're looking at the consumer purchase pattern, the behavior of consumers coming and shopping on Amazon. What keywords are they using? How much are they buying? And what's the season they're buying? What is the description description I need to put on, what title should I even put on. All of these are very data-driven decisions that Amazon's able to make through their automation engine. And Amazon will start with commodity products, the products which are easy to go into their manufacturers. Can I call the manufacturer that is producing goods for Black & Decker and directly work with them? In fact, Amazon has started a program that manufacturers can directly work with Amazon to cut the middle brand and sell the similar products or even the same products in some cases under a different brand name, which is Amazon's brand name. So they will start their way through very commodity brands which are easily replicable, paper or paper towels or diapers or microwaves and things like that, and eventually getting to more fashion brands and things like that, which might be a little harder for Amazon to penetrate.
So there's no question that Amazon has an advantage on Amazon. Let's look at the bigger picture. You know, over the next 4 days, how do you see Amazon and the competition with Walmart and Target and other retailers playing out? Who wins, who loses? At
this point, as we see, and in the data that we have seen, Amazon's already starting to dominate very big in terms of pricing and selection in the holiday guides. So their prices are the lowest? The prices are the lowest right now, and even much more sharper than even a year ago. They're currently, with the holiday guides that we looked at and scraped the prices on, we saw Amazon being about 93% of items which overlapped. Amazon is cheaper than Target. And with Walmart's case, it's about 85% of common products are cheaper on Amazon. So the battlefront has become extremely fierce. And retailers, if they have a chance, first of all, many retailers have already filed this year, and it was an Armageddon year for retailers. The ones that are remaining, they have survived because of the automation and AI technologies that they're using, but the battlefront has just become extremely fierce for them to compete.
So where does Walmart have an edge? Where does Target have an edge?
They have to really think about how they strategically use their stores. It's ironic to think about it that way, but if you just go to battle with Amazon on their battlefront, which is price and widest selection, you're going to lose. But on the other hand, is there a convenience that you can offer by picking in store or offering some discounts to coming inside the store and things like that? That could be a very good advantage for Target and Walmart.
What about more niche retailers and specific brands? Do they? We've been talking a lot about how we've seen many of them not survive the rise of Amazon, and yet I wonder if some are also stronger than ever because they can offer something that Amazon does not.
There are retailers which are specialty retailers. If there's a specific reason to essentially buy it in the store, maybe it's a very big brand name, and you can write on the brand name and the cachet of that. Perhaps that's been adding a lot of reason for consumers to go into the store and shop. But the consumer behavior right now is shifting to an online-first behavior. Now, whether you are a branded consumer brand or whether you are a commodity retailer, you have to really go after and win the online battle, and trying to understand how do you use automation, how do you use artificial intelligence. Because look, Amazon is putting a robot against a human being. And in most cases, if not all, a robot is going to win against human beings because the number of decisions that it can take, the amount of dynamism that it can bring in is exponentially higher than what a human being can do.
All right, well, I will be exploring the battlefield from my couch on Black Friday. So I'm doing all my shopping online. Guru Hariharan, CEO of Boomerang, going to keep all your thoughts in mind. Thank you. Coming up, Foxconn is adding to the gloom around global electronics with plans to slice $2.9 billion from expenses. How the bad news isn't just contained to Apple. That's next. Plus, Alphabet Chair John Hennessy is not so sure about Google's China strategy. Why he says he is not confident about the company's plans for a censored search engine. This is Bloomberg. The gloom around the global electronics industry getting gloomier, this time with Foxconn. The biggest assembler of iPhones is aiming to cut $2.9 billion from expenses in the next year, citing a very difficult and competitive year ahead in an internal memo. The company also said the iPhone business will need to reduce expenses by almost $900 million next year, as it plans to eliminate 10% of non-technical staff. The news follows a bad week for Apple, as we have mentioned, after 4 suppliers cut their revenue estimates because of weak iPhone demand. Bloomberg Opinion's Tim Kolpin joined us from Taipei Wednesday to discuss.
50% of Foxconn's revenue does come from Apple. So, of course, they are the #1 supplier. They are very important to Foxconn. But in fact, 6 of the 20 billion in cuts is in the iPhone division, the part that assembles iPhones. So there's a lot more in other divisions. What that tells us is this is not an iPhone-only problem. It's not just iPhone-specific. It's broader. You know, Foxconn's catalog of clients includes HP. It includes Sony, Nintendo, Cisco, Dell, a very, very, very long list of international names. So they're all impacted, or certainly they all feed into this wider issue that we're seeing in the electronics industry, and Foxconn is the one company that gets hit by all of it.
What is the wider issue? That people just aren't buying hardware anymore, or that the market isn't growing as much as it has been?
It's all of those things. I mean, we have a macroeconomic headwinds. A lot of people are getting caught up in, trade tensions, US-China tensions and so forth. It's actually bigger and deeper than that. That's in a way a smokescreen. It's a distraction. We know, for example, that, Apple itself is trying harder and harder to sell more units. And in fact, in the last earnings, they said, we're not going to tell you how many we ship anymore. We're only going to focus on revenue. So that kind of tells you that in future, it's not going to be good news on the shipment side. The smartphone market overall, it's reached its peak in terms of growth numbers. Sure, more and more people will continue to buy smartphones, but not at the same level. PCs are not really back in vogue, so we're looking at other areas of hardware, IoT products. The Apple Watch might take up some of the slack, and of course things like servers. A lot of the devices that are being made and being sold are stuff that consumers like you and me never see. They sit in server farms and they serve up Netflix videos and YouTube videos and Spotify music. We never see that hardware, but it is there. But if there is a slowdown elsewhere in the industry, say in the internet era, in Spotify or Facebook or Google, if any of those show slowdowns, then we could see that impact wider and wider. And again, it comes back to Foxconn. Foxconn is the company that has its finger in all of these companies because it's the largest manufacturer. It does something for almost everybody.
Tim, you've spent many, many years there in Taipei covering the supply chain. Every year we get these dribs and drabs about, how suppliers are faring. There's one camp that says these early indicators aren't necessarily good indicators, and at the end of the quarter, it's still a great quarter for Apple. Would you say that this quarter is different?
It feels different. We won't know until the end of the quarter whether it really is different. But we've seen warning signs for 3 months. I was looking at things like inventory. Back in August, I was looking at inventory across the whole supply chain, and it was at the highest level since the financial crisis a decade ago. And we're not seeing sales of that are that strong. We are seeing sales slowing down. So if inventory is so high but sales are not as strong as they used to be, something's got to give. So we're seeing inventory issues. But in terms of is this different, is this worse, it feels like it is because there is so many consistent warning signs coming from across the board, not just Apple suppliers but other companies in the technology industry, especially in hardware. So it certainly feels like it could be worse.
Bloomberg Opinion's Tim Kolpin there in Taipei. For more, I want to bring in Loop Ventures co-founder Gene Munster. Gene, always great to have you. Last week when we talked about the iPhone production cuts, you said that you thought these early indicators aren't very good indicators for what the quarter ultimately shows. But now we have even more bad news that there are production cuts across all 3 of Apple's new iPhones, and this news from Foxconn. Does that make you any more concerned about the fate of the iPhone this quarter?
Yes, it makes us more concerned, Emily, but not to the point where we think that there is anything wrong with the quarter. And so I think that this is an art to try to read these data points from the channel. Typically, when you hear these data points, as Tim was talking about, his view is that we've landed in a place where there could be something that's not right about Apple's December quarter. I'm still firmly in the camp that things are going to be fine and that Apple's guidance hasn't materially changed. Nothing has changed in the business over the last 3 weeks since November 1st when they gave guidance. But there is a process here of taking these data points. I just want to put a little bit of a finer point on it, is that if we're hearing these kind of things, let's say mid-December, then we start to realize there's a problem. Typically, Apple does cut production within the supply chain. You said it when you were talking. You asked the question when you were talking to Tim. Don't we see these drips and drabs every quarter, every year? And the answer is we do. And so it really is the magnitude and the timing of these which is most important. And simply put, I don't think we're at a point right now where we're in any sort of risk to Apple's December quarter.
All right. Now, I want to turn to another subject and a personal experiment that you ran on yourself where you tried to take technology out of your life. You published a note saying that superhumans will use less technology, not more. Tell me about your discovery as a result of this experiment.
So the broader topic is tech addiction, and this is an important topic. And Doug Clinton, who's one of the managing partners at Loop Ventures, has done a lot of research on that. And the entire Loop team has gone through different phases over the last month where we've kept our phones at home and gone on watch or tried different, more slimmed down versions of the phone. And what we found is simply that all of us, most of us, struggle with some form of tech addiction. Some people, just like people who maybe struggle with alcohol, have it and they can manage it. It might be a 3 or a 4, but there are people who it's more extreme. It's kind of an 8 or a 9. And the simple takeaway is this, is we have become content-consuming machines. The way these phones are geared, it's not the hardware problem. The way that Facebook and YouTube gears their recommendation engines, it just can become this trap where it becomes mindless activity. And so what we're really trying to do is find ways, how do you actually minimize it? So today Google came out with some new tools to help manage, similar to the tools that Apple has, to help using software to manage your tech addiction. The reality, that's like putting a lock on someone's alcohol cabinet who might have a drinking problem. That simply won't work. There is an opportunity here to create new ways of hardware, or an even easier opportunity simply to delete Facebook, delete Instagram, delete YouTube. And I challenge your viewers, if you do that, I bet you will find more time and you will feel more alive and more human in doing that.
You know, I actually don't doubt that, Gene, but here's my question, and you say you might never go back to your bad phone, the one that still has all those apps on it, but what about the expectations of society, the expectations of your employer? Because these tools do exist, don't all of those things have to change if our behavior is also going to change?
We think everyone should have a phone. We think that we are not going back. I think multi-devices, we think wearables. We're huge believers in tech. And I think that's kind of the surprising distinction, is we think that these can coexist. We think that in order to, for kids, for example, just to be, quote, normal, you probably need to be on Instagram just to communicate with your friends, or Snapchat. And so there are levels around that and some parameters. But the issue that we have isn't with tech. The issue is when it becomes to be more consuming. And you know when you're slipping into that, when it has this, you quickly spend 15 minutes in mindless activity. That's the piece that we're trying to zero in on.
All right, Gene Munster, Loop Ventures. Gene, always great to have you here on the show, and hope you have a tech-less Thanksgiving. Superhuman. Superhuman as well. Thank you. Okay, still ahead, Alphabet Chair John Hennessy responds to Google's handling of the sexual misconduct claims and employee walkouts. What he has to say about anger among the troops. This is Bloomberg. Acclaimed computer scientist and former Stanford University president John Hennessy was named chair of Alphabet before a very tough year. From Google's handling of sexual misconduct claims and staff walkouts to the announcement of the company's return to China, there's been no shortage of negative headlines. Our senior executive editor, Brad Stone, sat down with Hennessy on Bloomberg Studio 1.0 to talk about sexual harassment, Alphabet CEO Larry Page, a censored Google China, and more. He asked Hennessy for his reaction to Google employees' recent activism. Take a listen.
Well, I think it's different. You expect students certainly to be engaged in this kind of activity. It's less common among employees, but I think Google encourages people to speak out and to really participate in helping shape a great work environment.
So what can you do in this kind of situation other than just
Dialogue.
listen to them?
Listen. That's the first thing, is listen. You have to listen. And I think that's one of the things I learned at Stanford along the way, just listening. And sometimes where there's smoke, there's a little fire. If you listen early enough, you keep it as a small fire rather than let it get out of control.
There were recently news reports about kind of alleged cover-ups or payoffs of sexual misconduct at Alphabet, and Sundar, wrote a note to the company, saying that these were hard reports to read, and pledging that the company had done things differently. What did you make of those reports, and is Alphabet a different company than it maybe was even 3 years ago?
Yeah, I can't comment on the individual details of the reports and what happened and the people, but I can tell you that there is a very different policy in place. It's been reviewed by the board, and the board gets periodic reports on what actions that have been taken under that policy. So I think we've concluded that that is something that requires attention at the highest level of management. And as Sundar said in his letter to Googlers, there have been a number of cases prosecuted under that, and people have left the company, including higher level management.
I mean, how did you feel reading that? Because those were some of the decisions around, for example, Android creator Andy Rubin that presumably kind of you were involved with at the time.
I think we were at the time, I think things were a very different situation. Not everybody was aware of things, and I don't know I can't comment on the exact details of what happened at that time. But I think we realized that the policy needed strengthening. And that was the goal, to get a stronger, more aggressive policy. And I know personally, my position has always been that these things are intolerable, and that you create a workplace that's hostile to women or to other people where there's discrimination or harassment. You're going to have a weaker workplace.
Google employees are upset, and they're making their voices heard. What do you say to them?
I say to them, we have to do better as a company.
China. What's your view on the opportunity and then the risk that you might be compromising some of the company's values?
I think it's something we worry about. I mean, anybody who does business in China compromises some of their core values, every single company, because the laws in China are quite a bit different than they are in our own country. The question that I think comes to my mind and that I struggle with is, are we better off giving Chinese citizens a decent search engine, a capable search engine, even if it is restricted and censored in some cases, than a search engine that's not very good? And does that improve the quality of their lives? And that's the struggle we have to work our way
Right. So
through.
can you do more good by being there, even in a compromised form?
Correct. I think that's.
And do you know the answer to that? I
don't know the answer to that.
Because you were there 7 or 8 years ago.
I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a legitimate question in asking, how can you do it and still live within the context of what their regulations are?
What does it tell you about the political climate these days, or perhaps the empowerment that employees are feeling, that even as this search engine was in a prototype form, the news got out and people were wringing their hands and debating it?
Part of what is reflected inside Google, as it is everywhere in the Valley and everywhere in our country right now, is the divisiveness that exists in our country. And I think that divisiveness has fed more concern about how these technologies get used.
The search engine aside, if Google were to introduce cloud tools in China, you'd probably, as Apple does, have to store data inside the country. Is that something that the company should be doing? Does that worry you?
If you wind back to the time when Google decided to exit China, there were lots of things going on, not just censorship, but also
potential surveillance.
Yeah, surveillance, hacking attempts, things like that. And those all added together to create a situation. We're in a different time now, asking how you do this, how you make it safe. But you're right, if you store data in the country, it can be gotten at by the Chinese authorities.
Does that make you feel uncomfortable?
I think you should worry about it. At a minimum, you better make sure that your users understand that.
Speaking of the divisiveness, we do seem to be in the midst or even in a trade war with China. What would be the potential implications for Silicon Valley or for Alphabet in particular if the hostilities continue or even get worse?
I think in general, trade wars are not productive, and they're not economically productive either. And we should try to remind people of that and find a way to move forward.
That was Alphabet Chair and former president of Stanford University, John Hennessy, with our own Brad Stone on Bloomberg Studio 1.0. You can catch the full episode tonight, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday to all of those who are celebrating. We will see you back here on Monday. Bloomberg Tech is live streaming, as always, on Twitter. Check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter as well. This is Bloomberg.